this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
The Middle is supported by Journalism Funding Partners, a nonprofit organization striving to increase the sustainability of local journalism by building connections between donors and news organizations. More information on how you can support The Middle at listentothemiddle.com. Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, joined as always by our house DJ Tolliver. Tolliver, do you know what the most trusted name in news is?
Elon Musk? Wendy Williams?
No.
Janet Jackson?
No, it's actually the Weather Channel. That is according to an economist poll. The people, they believe what they see on the Weather Channel more than anything else, which is very interesting for our topic this
I agree
hour.
with that.
Now, as you know, Tolliver, this show, The Middle, is trying to do a number of things. First and foremost, as we always say, we're trying to elevate the voices of people in the geographic and political middle into the national conversation. We want to get away from the extremes and focus on the often ignored people who live outside the media echo chamber. We also want to be an outlet that is trusted across the political spectrum. We're here in good faith, trying to have conversations about the big issues in a civil way, and we welcome different points of view, in the hope that we can earn listeners' trust, and trust in the media is near record lows. A recent Gallup poll found only 32% of the population has a great deal or a fair amount of confidence that the media reports the news in a full, fair, and accurate way. So our question this hour, how can news organizations regain your trust? Tolliver, what is the number for people to call in?
It's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353, or write to us at listentothemiddle.com.
And the calls are coming already in, so let's meet our panel. Mike Pesca is a longtime journalist who currently hosts the daily podcast, The Gist. Mike, great to have you on The Middle.
Thanks for having me on. Shamefully, I've never worked at the Weather Channel, but my application is in.
It's not too late.
And Sarah Alvarez is also with us, founder and editor of Outlier Media, which is a nonprofit news organization focused on serving the people of Detroit. Sarah, great to have you on The Middle as well.
Thanks so much. Good to be here.
And before we get to the phones, let's diagnose the problem if we can. Why don't people trust the media as much as they used to, Mike Pesca?
They have proven themselves not worthy of the people's trust. And it is because we are awash in information, but we don't really have meaning. And so in the 1970s or 1980s, our 3 broadcast channels and our big city evening paper and morning paper, they had a bit of a monopoly on the information that people got, and they took that seriously, and they knew that everyone would be reading their publications or tuning in. So if you presented a worldview that was just seemed upside down to a large portion of your city, you would suffer. Now you're incentivized to serve every niche, and a hugely successful, let's just take a hugely successful cable station like MSNBC, read a big article on it, and its leftward tilt in the New York Times today. That could draw, when their ratings are going gaga, that could draw 1.5% of the American viewing public. So they're, not to pick on MSNBC, but everyone is incentivized to play for a niche, to play against this backdrop of so much attenuated attention spans that it is very hard to stick to the virtue of being honest, truthful, relevant, and interesting. And that's what you have to do. And the incentives are very much aligned against it.
I will say it could be a small audience, but as you know, MSNBC and CNN and Fox News are on the wall in just about every major news organization all day long. So the other journalists are still watching those channels. Sarah Alvarez, what do you think? Why do people not trust the media as much as they used to?
Well, I think there's something to what Mike was saying, but I think that question of irrelevancy is really important. And I do want to make a distinction. While national news might not be trusted, local news is much more trusted than national news. And that's true across the board. It did not surprise me at all that the Weather Channel is the most trusted outlet, because weather is something that people need to know every day, even though we have it on our phones. And I think that goes to like a very important question about what is the purpose of the news. At Outlier, we very much think that our first goal is to fill information gaps. So we're really trying to give people information that is directly relevant to them, like Mike said, but that they can also use. And we make sure that journalists intervene when they have a problem that they can't solve. And we run a text message-based information service in addition to doing accountability work and culture coverage. So I do think it is not just the tilt, it's also what are these news organizations doing? What are they giving? And are they just covering events, or are they really working to provide a service?
Let's go to the phones because there are a lot of calls coming in. Deborah is on the line from Minneapolis. Hi, Deborah. Welcome to the middle. What do you think?
Well, I was speaking with a gentleman earlier, and I just said that I feel like the coverage of the pandemic was not a broad view of the pandemic. And I feel like there are a lot of alternative ways to take care of yourself: supplementation, acupuncture, naturopathic. And I don't feel like that was covered.
Interesting. So you believe that the media was too one-sided in coverage of the pandemic. Mike Pesca, I remember covering the pandemic every single day, and the doctors were saying, thank you for talking about the value of the vaccines, for example. Thank you for covering how important it is for people to, this is in the early days of the pandemic. But as the pandemic went on, of course, it became so politicized that some people thought the media was doing the wrong thing by talking about various aspects.
I'm sympathetic to the caller's point. I really am. I don't think that the media did well. Of course, when we say the media, we mean both Joe Rogan and ABC's This Week, who must have had Fauci on 12 times. So how could they both not have done well? And I think we do default to the mainstream media or the big networks and the big cable channels, and we trust them to get it right, or to at least have enough humility to say, this is the best information that we're going on at the time. And so I don't think they did the second thing as much as they needed to. I literally don't think that they thought it was only the best information at the time. I think that when lockdowns were prescribed, there was huge agreement that this was necessary. In retrospect, I happen to think it was necessary, but it's also a bit of a closer call. And some countries that didn't go with lockdowns succeeded. And then you have the question of how long did the lockdowns need to go? And you had entire school systems that were tearing each other apart over this question. And I do think that most people who couldn't be more impassioned about this, and were also really knowledgeable about what was going on in their schools, would tune to maybe the national media and see Fauci, who I think was doing the best job he could, but talking without the undertone of we're trying our best and we might be getting it wrong. I never heard any of that. I heard so much certainty that in retrospect couldn't have all been true. And so I think now the people look back on that era, and many of them have problems with how the media covered the pandemic. Even if, like you, I think that vaccines were great and a miracle, and I don't think it, I know it saved hundreds of thousands of lives.
Let's go to Ed, who's in Detroit, Michigan. Hi, Ed. Welcome to the middle. What can the media do to regain your trust?
Well, we need more independent media. We got to get rid of this corporate media that we have out there that's strictly looking at how do I not offend my advertisers, and the media groups need to provide more journalists with more time to dig into stories. And the government, quite honestly, if they want to cover something up, they just don't respond to FOIA requests over and over and over again until finally it's out of the news cycle and therefore gets ignored. It's horrible.
Ed, where do you get your news? What media do you trust, Ed?
Well, I get my news from all over the place, and one person who, because of his own demons, I'm sure, but I'm not positive, I don't know him personally, Charlie LaDuff is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He had his own show going on here in Detroit. He had to pay for his own FOIA requests that he did through Lansing. It took him almost a year to get them.
Yeah.
And then he had to fact check. When he's trying to fact check it, he's being blocked at every avenue possible.
Ed, thank you for that. I think we've got it there. And Sarah Alvarez, I don't know if you know the person that Ed was talking about there, but he says too much corporate greed in the media should be more independently focused, like what you're doing.
Right. So, yeah, I would definitely suggest that you look up Outlier Media. And I also think that I do think that the point is taken that people feel pretty disconnected from accountability and not as powerful as they really are. We run a program at Outlier, and it's run in 16 other places across the country called the Documenters Program. The Documenters Program started out of Chicago. We were the second news organization to take it on. And what we do is train people and then pay them to cover government meetings and community meetings. They're paid $18 an hour. They take notes at these meetings. They live tweet these meetings. Those notes are edited by 2 different editors at one of 9 different news organizations in the city, and then they become part of the public record, and they also help impact the coverage. But they're used on their own, and we have more than 500 documenters working with us in Detroit, and it's become an incredibly powerful group of people who are just normal Detroiters, but I think have started to work with news organizations to make people more accountable to them. And I do think that makes a huge difference.
But you got to have money for that.
Sure. We fundraise for that. We're a nonprofit news organization, and we have to do fundraising. I do think that is a better model than, hedge fund backed newspapers, for example. But it's not, you can have poor quality news coming out of a nonprofit. It is really on news organizations to make sure that they are delivering high quality, actionable, valuable information every day.
Just checking in on what we have coming in online, Tolliver. I see that John in Chicago writes, mistrust, conspiracy, and fear is the point of conservative media, so it can't be fixed when it is working as planned. As for NPR, it can stop endlessly focusing on what hell monsters all white men are, but I love what the middle is trying to do. Mike, we're going to get to NPR in a moment after the break, but I mean... Anyway, we'll get to NPR. We have a lot more to come. But Tolliver, I do want to remind our listeners The Middle is available as a podcast in partnership with iHeart Podcasts on the iHeart app or wherever you listen to podcasts. We have a lot more to come, and we'll be right back with more of The Middle.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured 2 prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
to be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of to come around here and my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, and philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking you, what can media organizations do to regain your trust? Tolliver, what's the number to call in?
It's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com or on social media.
I'm joined by Outlier Media founder and editor Sarah Alvarez and Mike Pesca, longtime journalist and host of the Gist podcast. And before we get back to the phones, let's talk about NPR as we said we would. Now, this show is not distributed by NPR, but it is on NPR stations. And NPR was in the news recently because of Uri Berliner, the former NPR editor, who said the network had lost the trust of Americans because it was too one-sided. Basically, that side he meant was the left. Here is what he had to say during an interview on News Nation.
Most people are not locked into ideologies. And I think many people are just sick of it. And it's one of the reasons people distrust so much of the media, whether it's legacy media, whether it's conservative media. You know what you're getting. It's all pre-digested and spit out to you. You know what the take is going to be. And I think it's ultimately unsatisfying. And for a vast part of this nation, they don't want it.
Mike Pesca, I remember speaking with journalists at a public radio station a couple of years ago, and they were trying to decide whether they should ever allow their member of Congress on the air again because this person had voted against certifying the results of the last election. My thought to them was, of course, you have to have that person on, challenge them, but they're elected to represent all of your listeners. There are many who disagree with that. What do you think about that? What do you think about NPR and what Uri Berliner's critique was?
Well, if that station decided the answer was no, they could still call themselves a radio station. I don't see how they could call themselves a public radio station without violating some truth and labeling laws. That I agree with so much of what Uri had to say. He's going to be on my show. We did an over hour-long interview a couple days ago, and we're airing that. I don't think that the exact, and what he was mostly talking about was a lack of viewpoint diversity. And he posited that it was mostly a lack of Republicans or conservatives. I wouldn't even say that that was so true. I think for a long time, for a few years, and especially after the election of Donald Trump, and then things accelerated during the reckoning and the pandemic and the death and murder of George Floyd, there was a social justice activism lens that so informed so many pieces. And so maybe this gets to your listener who talked about the white man hellscape. But there was a jargon, there was a doctrinaire mindset, and it was very, very hard to ever escape it. Now, sometimes I enjoy all ideologies, and seeing the world through the prism of, say, white supremacy is interesting to me as far as it is accurate and relevant. But you have to be truthful, accurate, and relevant when the accuracy of things began to be stretched, or when the relevance of some stories was, I very often would say to myself, okay, this one's not for me. And then the next story would come down on the radio and say, okay, this one's not for me. And then after a while, you're like, maybe the network's not for me. listenership has dropped by 30%. Their podcasts aren't doing well. And they'll talk about true things like drive time listenership got hit hard during the pandemic, and just people are shifting away from traditional ways of listening.
Yeah.
But if you don't think about your programming as the reason why people aren't listening, you're not doing your job. You're not being the public in public radio, as they used to say.
Let's go to the phones. And Marvin is in North Hempstead, Long Island.
Woohoo! That's where
Marvin.
Public Enemy's from. Don't believe the hype.
Yeah.
Is that right, Marvin?
Hi. I have I want to pass along a suggestion I heard someone make recently that the New York Times, the Washington Post, and sources like The Economist, Wall Street Journal lower their paywalls during the election season so that people can get access to their content for free. Because one of the problems is the junk news is free. You can get that anywhere. But the quality, really good sources like the New York Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal, you got to pay for that. So I think I'd like to know what the guests think of that idea, lowering their paywalls.
It's a great point. Season. It's a great point, Marvin. Sarah Alvarez, I'll go to you and just say, of course, social media, where so many people are getting their media right now, is free for the most part, whereas the news organizations where you have journalists that are checking facts and doing all that stuff, they cost money a lot of times.
Well, yeah, but NPR is free too, to the earlier point.
Yes.
And I would like to kind of push back on that, because I think one of the problems that a lot of news organizations have is that they're actually going after too narrow of an audience. They're going after only a certain kind of person, and the person that they're going after, and this is too bad that I came from public radio too, right? That station, many stations are going after people who they think can contribute and who can become members, right? And so they're leaving out a lot of people and their concerns. So it is not surprising that what you get is an echo chamber. And people who have a lot of money are overserved by media. They have too much information. And then we have a lot of people around the country that can't get information that they desperately need to survive. And back to the pandemic, I think that's when I talk about information gaps, what I'm talking about is the state that we were in at the beginning of the pandemic, when we did not know what to do in order to keep ourselves safe. There are people who live in information gaps all across this country every day, and news organizations need to work harder to fill those gaps.
Let's go to Randy in Pittsburgh. Randy, welcome to The Middle. Go ahead.
Hi, how do you do? Thank you so much. What would restore my trust in the news actually has surprisingly little to do with the news organizations themselves. Basically, you have like about a quarter of the population who is being fed and constantly broadcasting massive amounts of disinformation. So what would really improve, I think, things if you had, I don't know, for lack of a better term, truthfulness laws for social media, for stuff that you're allowed to say, for stuff that's allowed to be broadcast. I mean, asking what any given news organization can do to improve trust in is right now without addressing that. It's kind of like saying, why are these antibiotics aren't working in a room that's filled with uranium-235?
But I guess who would police the social media if you were going to try to keep it factual?
That's a good question. I mean, I know there could be things about if there's truth in labeling laws, for example. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm just brainstorming here. If there was something like, this is news, these criteria have met, it's been fact checked by 6 organizations or by these, it has this process. This is journalism. Even if you don't believe it, it has gone through an editorial process that has been verified by fact checkers. They're simply saying it's news because 7 million people repeat a lie that somebody told. That's just a bullhorn of opinion. Forgive me for not having a better suggestion.
Well,
than
it's a good point, Randy. Let me bring it to Mike Pesca. Mike, it seems like the way that we do that on social media when they try to show you what's true and what's not is a crowd. It's like the crowd gets to decide and put a note below the tweet or the X post or whatever.
Yeah. Well, actually, I like that innovation, though it doesn't solve all the problems. It doesn't make up for the algorithm on Twitter/X. I understand the frustration, and the UK, other countries do have press councils or the equivalent. They don't work that well, and they wouldn't work in the United States with the First Amendment. And it's not for lack of information about what is good information. It's not the case that, oh, if consumers could only get the good housekeeping stamp of approval on a story that flits across their consciousness via their cell phone, they'd believe it. People are entertained by all manner of the continuum of the truthful to the greatly exaggerated. They always have been. I think that what that gets at is what I was talking about in the beginning, which is like we're inundated with information. The answer is not to police the information, it's to combat it with truthfulness, relevance, and interestingness. And to Sarah's point, I don't think we said the word class so far, but we're getting at it. And most of the media, which reflects how American politics are bifurcated on educational lines, most of the media is the college educated, or now the quasi requirement that you get a journalism degree, which I think is a pretty bad development. I don't know if you have one.
Why? Why? Explain that. Well, I did major in journalism. I took a lot of liberal arts classes as well. I minored in history. But like, why do you think that's bad to have a journalism degree?
Journalism used to be the province of the blue collar individual. Most two white, two men. That's two male. That's true. But you could essentially join a newspaper like you would a guild and work your way up and be a copy boy, sometimes a copy girl. And it allowed for a broad swath of society to serve the public via the newspaper. It wasn't a highfalutin job that required an elite education, and it shouldn't be. And the fact that our news, even our great news institutions, and I think the New York Times does a very, very good job, and they've been getting better in the last few years, but they're now posting the bios of their writers. And of their writers' bios, they did a survey of them. And something like over a third went to either an Ivy League school, Harvard, MIT, Northwestern, or Duke. And I was interested to see how many of them went to a CUNY, which is City College of New York, or a SUNY, State University of New York School. And the answer is 2. Wait, maybe 3 if you include CUNY. We're talking about hundreds of reporters. And they kind of cover the city like it, and they cover the state like it.
Yeah.
They cover the state like a person who, they care. The New York Times, I'll shut up for a second, but the New York Times has done, I did this ratio, a ratio of something like 60-1 stories about Harvard, a school not in their state, versus stories in one of the 4 flagship institutions of the SUNY system. Yeah.
I will say just on the issue of a journalism degree, one of the best pieces of advice that works in journalism that I ever got was not in a journalism class. It was from the great Nobel Peace Laureate Elie Wiesel, who I took a class from in college, who said, "Trust those who seek the truth, distrust those who found it," which I thought was works very well in our business. Tolliver, a lot of people look back to a time when there were way fewer options in the media and more people trusted the people who reported the news.
Yeah, people like Walter Cronkite, Edward R. Murrow. Actually, Murrow was one of the first to report from Buchenwald concentration camp just after it was liberated in World War II. Listen to this.
I pray you to believe what I have said about Buchenwald. I have reported what I saw and heard, but only part of it. For most of it, I have no words. If I have offended you by this rather mild account of Buchenwald, I am not in the least sorry.
So, Sarah Alvarez, that is a really interesting clip to hear right now, I think, because whenever there's a war going on, people don't always trust the words coming from the politicians, and the media becomes all the more important in telling people what's going on so they can make decisions about what to do.
I think that is true. I think what I would like to kind of bring us back to is like right sizing of responsibility for different parts of this story, right? I'm a local reporter. I run a local newsroom here in Detroit, and we have the largest Arab population outside of the Middle East is in Dearborn, in our area. We also have a very large Jewish population outside of the city of Detroit, but in the metro area. So we're covering things that are relevant to our community, and we are being very transparent about how we're making choices. But we have to also rely on national media and international media to do their jobs, so that we can interpret it. Like local reporters, we are long past. I think we have this asymmetry problem because people trust local reporters most because we are close to them, they know us, and we are accountable to them. But local news no longer has the resources to send people across the country or across the world to check out events and then report back for our audiences and to be trusted. And there are not a lot of partnerships between national news organizations and local news organizations. I think public radio is an exception where, you're getting kind of where a local reporter is telling a local audience, I trust this reporter. Like you can take this information. I trust it. You can trust it. We just don't have that kind of coordination in the system.
Let's go to Will, who's in Houston, Texas. Hi, Will. Go ahead. Welcome to The Middle.
Hi. Good to be back.
What do you think?
Here's what I think is that we need to have more unbiased news coverage, whether that's done by independent journalists or hedge funds. I don't care as long as it gets done. Keeping things, get this, in the middle makes things a lot better for the American public. It allows more news to be spread in unbiased fashion, and that allows for people to create their own thoughts. I think NPR does a good job. Yes, they're leaning more towards the left lately, but I think that's just the general disgust with the current state of the conservative party. Not to get political, but, if you're truly a diehard Trump fan, you're not going to like anything other than Fox News. So love NPR, love The Middle, love what y'all do. I think if we have more voices coming from, the general population in America and having these discussions, we have better discussions on what, is currently happening in America. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Will, thank you so much. Mike, Will brings up Trump, who spent and continues to attack the press at every turn. How much of a problem has that been, do you think, in the last however many years in just reducing the trust in the media among so much of the country?
It is a problem because that is a tactic of his, and it's just an empirical truth that he sets records for lying, not that all politicians don't lie, and not that the lies of everyone shouldn't be tracked down. But it is destabilizing. And the fact that it is an effective tactic, I mean, it's always been true. Spiro Agnew and the Democrats and Republicans of the 1800s used to pillory the press, right? That is the fact. But Donald Trump has taken it to a new, he's developed some artistry around it. So you'd have to tip your hat to him if most newsrooms could still afford a hat. It is destabilizing. The lack of a shared reality, and I'm not even talking about if you cover student loans as a net positive or a net negative, just a shared reality that there are student loans, or that, this is what the Weather Channel would say, it is raining, has really been stripped from us. And Donald Trump is the symptom and the cause of so much of that.
Well, some of the media's trust issues are self-inflicted, Tolliver, including from some of the biggest names in news.
Jeremy, if you remember back in 2015, former NBC Nightly News anchor Brian Williams had to publicly apologize for mischaracterizing some of his reporting during the Iraq War.
I made a mistake in recalling the events of 12 years ago. It did not take long to hear from some brave men and women in the air crews who were also in that desert. I want to apologize. I said I was traveling in an aircraft that was hit by RPG fire. I was instead in a following aircraft.
Well, Brian Williams left the NBC Nightly News because of that, although he did make a comeback on MSNBC for several years afterwards. Tolliver, I will say The Middle has not been hit by RPG fire, but you can rate our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts with a 5-star rating. That really makes a difference. We really appreciate you listening, and we'll be right back with more of The Middle.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world. The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of to come around here and my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. We're asking you this hour, what can media organizations do to regain your trust? You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. I'm joined by Outlier Media founder and editor Sarah Alvarez and Mike Pesca, longtime journalist and host of the Gist podcast. Let's go back to the phones. And Julie, who's in Ogden, Utah. Hi, Julie. What do you think? What can media organizations do to regain your trust?
Hi, thanks for having me on. I was thinking it would be good if they were required to list who is funding them, or if they're funding a particular story or funding the station, because like Gen Zers and millennials like myself, we understand capitalism, and we want to know like who's funding what so that we can inform ourselves. So do you guys know of any laws or requirements for agencies to say who's funding them?
Sarah Alvarez, I'll send that to you.
Yeah, I don't think that there are any requirements. Nonprofit newsrooms, most of them, any nonprofit newsrooms that are part of this like kind of trade group called the Institute for Nonprofit News, all list their donors, and also don't take anonymous contributions over a certain amount. And I think that that's important. We list our donors on our website. There's also, just FYI, there's a great tool that ProPublica has put out called Nonprofit Explorer. And if there's a nonprofit newsroom that you're interested in, you can enter that newsroom's name into the Nonprofit Explorer and learn more about their finances there.
Let's go to Michael, who's in Cincinnati, Ohio. Michael, welcome to The Middle. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. No, just follow on comments to, I believe, what your guest had said earlier about accountability and the other caller about trust in the media itself. Absolutely. I think, from my perspective, it seems as if too much opinion has been masquerading around as news these days. And I think newspapers previously did an excellent job with it between reporting versus opinions, where if there's an editorial, they would list it as an opinion point or an opinion letter that somebody would toss in, so at least people were aware of it. What I'd love to be able to see is some sort of ranking, maybe by a third party that would do fact-check review of any one of these sites or media outlets, giving them a score. It's kind of like if you're going to a restaurant, you can kind of take a look at whether or not they get an A grade, or is it a B or C or D or F grade from the health department. So at least you know what you're consuming. Either you're consuming food or you're consuming media. At least you know, is this going to be good for you or bad for you? And at that point in time, having that third-party ranking would be great to be able to see, so that at least then, yes. And if an outlet wants to go off and spew off opinions, First Amendment, absolutely. Go ahead, have whatever opinion you want, no problem. Just don't list it as facts or news. So you can sidebar that, and then as an overlay on the screen or on the side of the website, indicating these are opinions, big red letters, opinions. And then this is news. This is news, just like the newspapers used to do it. Following in line with what your other caller had indicated, it'd be great to be able to have that truth in advertising sort of element, so that the accountability factor can be held, that if there's false information, misinformation, leave it up for liability. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of tort and attorneys that would love to chase them down and hold them accountable with a lawsuit. So then all of this people will behave a little bit more. But anyway, so scoring it and
Mike
also
Pesca,
having
what do you
them
think about that? An A
risk.
grade, a B grade on the news?
So here's some news you can use. That service exists. Stephen Brill, who ran Brill's Content and The American Lawyer, he has a new company called NewsGuard. And not only does he rank and rate, do you know them? Yeah. Not only does it rank and rate all the outlets, there's a plugin on your computer. So it will pop up. If that's what you want, it will pop up and they will tell you who is trustworthy and who is not. And their rankings are interesting. You know, I saw recently that Al Jazeera slid down in the rankings after a number of misstatements. And I said to myself, that's interesting that they would note that. And I got something out of that. On the other hand, I do think, and it wasn't just this caller, it's this persistent notion that if we just knew who was behind this, there wouldn't be so much misinformation, disinformation. And with all due respect, I think that's wrong. I think that, first of all, most of the purveyors of news are large, publicly traded companies. MSNBC is Comcast, and we know who the Murdochs are, and they put out Fox, and CNN is Warner Discovery. It's not a question about who these people or what these outlets are. The question or the reason why maybe they're not trustworthy is they are serving the audience. And so this is why what you're doing in the middle is so important. If we have a shared reality, if we get into a situation where you don't want to get into a debate if you're a liberal with your Republican friend and just spew incorrect things, it would be very embarrassing. But to have that happen, you have to have a conservative friend if you're a liberal. So that's why it's a almost societal-wide project.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, the interesting thing is so many people now, when they have a friend who has different politics than them, they, unfriend them on all their social media. So then they have an even more of a bubble of just the people that agree with exactly what they think.
Right.
Let's go to Cheryl, who's in Northborough, Massachusetts. Hi, Cheryl. Welcome to the middle. What do you think?
Well, I just think that they should be fact-checking everything and not just blasting things out there. Someone says something or something happens and they just put it all over the news, and you listen to it for 12 hours, and then they're backtracking themselves because what they said was only partly true. Not all of it was true. And it's frustrating. You know, we just had, and it's a sad situation. Northborough was actually voted number 1 in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for safety. And believe it or not, Mother's Day, we had a child, 16 years old, who was murdered at a house party. And the information that has come out, you know, at the very beginning, at 3 o'clock in the morning, we get all this information, and then there's more information, and then, well, they arrested 3 people, but none of them are the ones that killed this kid. And then they backtrack, and, and it's just ABC, NBC, CBS. When something happens, they run with it. You know, even like the Karen Reed case, which is all over the news right now in Massachusetts, when that happened, it was probably 3 days of nothing but her, and then it was gone. And then they backtracked it. And now, you're listening to the trial, and it's like, what is true? Yeah. Even as far as the people that you're supposed to trust, are they doing their jobs? But I feel
Cheryl,
like
I think we've got your point there. Let me go to Sarah Alvarez. That is a very good point. A lot of times, especially in breaking news situations, a lot of information comes out and it ends up being wrong.
I do think that that's true. I think that that's a really tough problem to solve. Honestly, I think that's one of the toughest problems is what do you do in a breaking news situation? Because it's not only news organizations that are rushing to be first. It's people on social media. It's, influencers. It's a lot of people. And I do think that we have more of a value on being first than being right and thinking that we can correct it later. But it's really important for all of us to remember just how difficult it is to kind of put that back in the bottle. And it's very difficult to come back and you can correct something, but there's been a lot of studies that have shown that most people miss the correction and stick with the incorrect information. We always say, we don't have to be first, we have to be right, and we want to be the best. But I will say that we're lucky because we rely on other news organizations in Detroit to cover breaking news. I do think that that's one of the stickiest problems when we're talking about trust and quality.
When we talk about breaking news, I think we should bring in the elephant in the room here, which is social media. And we are having this conversation at a moment when the technology is changing rapidly. The artificial intelligence is getting so good that people can flood our news feeds and make videos that look real, but they aren't. It makes it even more difficult to trust what we're seeing, to know what's true and what isn't. First of all, Tolliver, I know you love social media. You
sure do.
You look at it all the time. I mean, do you feel like what you're getting when you're on TikTok is accurate?
No, I don't, and I don't. But then I also, like, on the flip side of that, will regurgitate a lot of those things if I'm in conversation at a bar or something like that, because I saw it really quickly and I didn't think to look deeper into it.
Mike, how do you deal with the sort of like AI, social media, keeping trust in the media when so many people are getting their news from a place that is not fact-checked, that isn't staffed by journalists even?
Yeah, I just assume, and this has always been my experience, it's going to be of such apparent lower quality. I mean, it's information, but it's really more habituation into data or the dopamine hit that one gets from seeing something that's, labeled nonfiction. But that's not really news. That's not the nourishment that real news can provide. It leads to horrible effects, right? There was a book about propaganda written, Nothing is True and Everything is Possible. That's the goal of the propagandist. And even if our social media, TikTok, isn't set out to inculcate us in that or have us steeped in that idea, that's, I think, what's going on in our society. So many people, as just a guard against this onslaught of information, say nothing is true, everything is possible. But to answer the question that you've been asking as a prompt, every segment, what should we do? I would say in a sentence, if we are the people in the media, and I think Sarah is doing this, we should put out media that is not for us, but is for them. Who is them? It is the audience. It is the audience we have and need to serve. It is the audience we want to serve. And it's not an imagined audience. Wouldn't it be great if people knew that? We have to think about who the audience is, give them what they need, what they don't even know they want, but not do it for us. Do it for them.
Let's go to Max, who's in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Max, welcome to The Middle. What do you think? What can the media do to regain your trust?
Well, what I think the media needs to do is become more explicit about its bias. I think that there is no such thing as unbiased media. Media is made by people. Everyone has an opinion. Sometimes you can't help but have an opinion. And returning to an era where media embraced its position and embraced its particular biases on different subjects would make it much easier to consume media. It would make things easier to read between the lines. It would be more in line with the kind of historic era of media. 100 years ago, you would have a socialist paper, you would have a right-wing paper, you would have a sort of centrist business liberal paper, and when you read each one of those, you would know where they're coming from and what sort of perspectives they bring. And returning to something like that, I think, would be greatly beneficial.
Do you think, though, Max, that even though obviously journalists are all human beings, that they at least have an obligation to try and think outside of their own bias?
I think that your biases and your personal background will color what you do no matter what. If you report on especially pressing matters, the very important things that we see in the world today, you're going to have thoughts on it. Particularly, there's been four major earth-shattering events of the last 20 years. 9/11, the recession, Trump, COVID. And we may be getting a fifth one right now with the war in Israel. And everybody has a different experience going through it. they have their own opinions on what should have been done to resolve it, and approaching the answers to these things that happen in the world, we need to be clear about what our perspectives are on it.
Yeah. Let's go to Sarah. Sarah, your thoughts on what Max had to say there.
I think there's something to it. Well, I also don't think that there's like a lot of news organizations out there hiding where they're coming from, right? It's not like we don't know where Fox News is coming from and we don't know where MSNBC is coming from. But I do think that news organizations should be transparent about what their goals are or what their mission is, right? What they're hoping to achieve with the information that they are supplying. But I also think that a return to biased, like more explicitly biased and more polarizing coverage is not going to solve anything in this environment. One thing that we do, and that I think some other news organizations are beginning to do, is a lot of survey work on what people actually want and need. That is, I think, much more valuable so that it helps control for the bias of the reporters. If your goal is to serve people and fill these particular information gaps, it's much less important what you think because your job is clear and has been defined by the community.
Yeah,
let's get
I
one
agree
more.
with that. And I know as a reporter, when I go to a situation and my orientation is not of objectivity, I agree that doesn't exist, but real open-mindedness, real fairness. My guiding light is not, I got to formulate my own opinion or propagate my opinion, but I got to figure out what the best way to think about this is and to have other people think about it. I'm a much better reporter. You know, our job shouldn't be to tell people what to think, but how to think.
Let's get to one more call here. Lucy is in Forest Park, Georgia. Hi, Lucy. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm wondering, and thank you for having me, what is the criteria for you all deciding that the media has not been truthful or objective? I think it's great that you're trying to do the middle ground, but I just wonder what the criteria is for deciding what is middle ground and what is not.
Lucy, thank you for that. Sarah, I'll just let you have the last word on that briefly.
Oh, well, thanks so much. And yeah, I think that it is easier. This is why the Weather Channel is popular, right? It is easier to figure out what is true when you can verify it yourself. So when news organizations work harder to provide information to people that is relevant to them and that they can easily see whether it is true or not and whether it mattered or not, we will do better.
Well, on that note, I want to thank my guests, Outlier Media founder and editor Sarah Alvarez and Mike Pesca, host of the GIST podcast. Thank you both.
Welcome.
And Tolliver, next week we're going to be leading into the Memorial Day holiday, and we're going to talk about what that holiday is actually about.
Yeah, we want to know what Memorial Day means to you and whether you spend time thinking about Americans who make the ultimate sacrifice for the country. We'll be joined by a former Secretary of Veterans Affairs as well as a Gold Star mom. It'll be a show you won't want to miss. You can call us at 844-464-3353 or write in at listentothemiddle.com.
And while you're there, sign up for our weekly newsletter. The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, and produced by Joanne Jennings, Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, and John Barth. Our intern is Annika Deschler. Our technical director is Jason Croft. And our theme music was composed by Andrew Haig. Thanks also to Nashville Public Radio, iHeartMedia, and the more than 410 public radio stations, making it possible for people across the country to listen to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Come see us live at the Palace Theater in Waterbury, Connecticut on June 3rd. Ticket information will be up at listentothemiddle.com, and I will talk to you next week.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969, Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather. In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to everybody.
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'm going back to my hometown to uncover the truth. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.